Okay, so good morning. My name is Evan Weiner, and I'm actually breaking in a new talk today. This is 1893, and a lot of things happened in 1893 that are still relevant today. And it's also summertime, so I'm going to be talking about a World's Fair that was of major importance in Chicago. Grover Cleveland was re-elected as president in 1892. He lost to Benjamin Harrison in 1888, and he was the first. His first term was back in 1884. He's back. There is a depression that happens in February, and it's a major depression. And at that point in history, it was the worst depression in the United States history. This is the Kingdom of Hawaii. And the Kingdom of Hawaii, hold on, okay, somebody else is coming in. Anyway, that is the Kingdom of Hawaii, and Hawaii was a kingdom throughout most of the 19th century, and it is overthrown by a bunch of sugar plantation owners. The Chicago World's Fair, and back there is the first ever Ferris wheel. And it was a marvel at the time, the Ferris wheel. The Civil Rights Movement and the Chicago World's Fair, that is Frederick Douglass. Bicycles, how many of you, and we're all women here with the exception of me, how many of you rode a bicycle? Did you have a sense of freedom with a bicycle? You didn't think of it. Well, back in 1893, there was the introduction of these bloomers, and all of a sudden women started wearing bloomers and they could ride bicycles, and this is the beginning of the new movement for women, a freedom movement.
That's Snickers. No, that's Snickers.
Those were bloomers. That's
bloomers
what they were
is
called.
underwear.
Well, no, while they called them bloomers, they were also knickerbockers around the New York area, but they were bloomers. New Zealand. Women finally get the right to vote in New Zealand. That's the first place that women were able to vote. Open heart surgery, 1893, the first open heart surgery. And there was an Oklahoma land rush, the Cherokee Reservation. All of a sudden, settlers decide to run out to Oklahoma to get land. Gandhi is arrested for the first time in 1893. And that is West Orange, New Jersey. And in West Orange, New Jersey is the first movie studio that's being built, and it was done by Thomas Edison, who was playing around with films in those days. And this is the engine for one of Henry Ford's first cars. There were engines that were being designed for cars in 1893. First Stanley Cup is given out, and this is 1983, and my daughter is plopped into the top of the Stanley Cup. And baseball makes a significant change for pitchers. Pitchers are moved back from 50 feet to 60 feet, 6 inches. So Grover Cleveland returns to the White House, and he's the first man ever to return to the White House after losing a race. He wins the White House in 1892. He lost in 1888. He wins the 1984 presidential election, defeating James Blaine. But he lost in his re-election bid in 1888 to Benjamin Harrison. Cleveland won the vote. He was the most popular of the two against Benjamin Harrison, but Benjamin Harrison happened to win the right states, and he won the electoral vote. And that is a bug in the American system that needs to be fixed, hasn't been fixed, that a guy actually getting the vote, or in the case of Hillary Clinton, a woman getting the popular vote but losing because of electoral college. 1892 presidential campaign was very quiet. President Benjamin Harrison's wife, Carolyn, was dying of tuberculosis, and he did not campaign. Nor did Cleveland. Cleveland would win the election in part because voters changed their mind about, oh, this might sound familiar to you, high tariffs. High tariffs in 1892. caused by William McKinley, who was a congressman who came up with all of these tariffs in 1890. And also because Tammany Hall decided to throw its support behind him. Cleveland's second term, however, opened on March 4th with the worst financial crisis in the country's history. Domestically, Cleveland opposed discrimination against Chinese immigrants in the West, but he did not support equality for African Americans or voting rights for women. And he thought Native Americans should be assimilated into mainstream society quickly, rather than preserve their own culture. So get rid of the Indian culture, don't allow women the right to vote, and we'll figure out what to do with African Americans as we go. But he's stuck with the Panic of 1893. And the roots of the Panic of 1893 go back to 1890 when Congressman William McKinley of Ohio proposed tariff to everything, put tariffs on everything. And he put tariffs on 1,500 products and dropped tariffs on things like sugar except for one country. But I'll get into that in a little bit. The Panic of 1893 started with banks in the interior of the country. Instability rose for two key reasons. First, the gold reserves maintained by the U.S. Treasury fell to about $100 million, which is $3.5 billion today, from $190 million, about $6.7 billion today in 1890. At the time, the United States was on the gold standard, which meant that the notes issued by the Treasury could be redeemed for a fixed amount of gold. Second source of this instability was that the economy activity slowed prior to the panic. The recession raised the rates of defaults on loans, which weakened banks' balance sheets, and also you're paying a lot more money for imported items. A tariff is not charged to a company. A tariff is a tax that individuals pay. And people were beginning to pay higher prices, and they weren't making a lot of money to begin with. Fearing for the safety of their deposits, men and women began to withdraw funds from banks. The money was not guaranteed by the government. Fear spread and withdrawals accelerated, leading to widespread runs on banks. Prices were sky high because of tariffs. And that is Wall Street. People are not very happy in 1893. The Panic of 1893 was set off by the collapse of the country's two largest employers, the Philadelphia and Reading Railroad. How many of you played Monopoly? How many of you landed on Reading Railroad? Well, Reading Railroad was part of the Philadelphia and Reading Railroad in those days, and the National Cordage Company. Following the failure of these two companies, a panic erupted in the stock market. The stock market crash was on May 5th. There was a 24% drop in the Dow Jones Industrial Average. In June, banks ran sweeps through the Midwestern and Western cities, such as Chicago and Los Angeles. More than 100 banks suspended operations. From mid-July to mid-August, the panic intensified with 340 banks suspending operations. Now, what would you have done back then? Knowing that the money wasn't guaranteed by the Federal Deposit Insurance Company because there was no FDIC in those days. Would you have run to the bank to get your money to make sure you had all the money that you had saved? Or would you let the system take care of it? I know in my case, I'm going to the bank. I want the money. I'll put it under the mattress. As these banks came under pressure, they withdrew funds. They kept on deposit in banks in New York City. Those banks began to get strained. The Panic of 1893, and there's Uncle Sam, and he's trying to put a gun to a wolf. The wolf at the door, and around the wolf there is a shroud or a sweater that says hard times. To satisfy withdrawal requests, money center banks began selling assets. During the fire sale, asset prices plummeted, which threatened the solvency of the entire banking system. In early August, New York banks sought to save themselves by slowing the outflow of currency to the rest of the country. The result? Well, In the interior, local banks were unable to meet currency demand. Many failed. Commerce and industry contracted. In many places, individuals, firms, and financial institutes began to use temporary expendices, such as scrip or clearinghouse certificates, to make payments when the banking system failed to function effectively. In other words, the banks failed in 1893. Here is a magazine called Judge, and here is Uncle Sam lecturing somebody. He wanted a change, and he got it. And they're talking about, well, you know, you change from tariffs, and you change from this and that, and this is the consequence of what happened. In the fall, the bank panic ended. Gold inflows from Europe lowered interest rates. Banks resumed operations, and cash and credit resumed lubricating the wheels of commerce and industry, but there was no quick recovery. In fact, it would take until 1897 to recover. In response to the economic crisis and to address the depletion of gold reserves, Cleveland pushed for the repeal of the Sherman Silver Purchase Act, which mandated government silver purchases. That repeal was passed in November and aimed to stabilize the currency, but also deepen the political divide over monetary policy. The Depression saw a decline in industrial production. Unemployment rose somewhere between 17 and 19%. There was widespread suffering. And on top of that, you had all the immigrants in the tenements and the Lower East Side and elsewhere who, in the very nature of their lives, were scrapping to find work. The economic divide was between rich and poor, and it was growing at a rapid pace. There were no easy solutions. Oh, I got a question for you. Is a tomato a fruit or a vegetable?
A fruit.
How many say fruit? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. How many say vegetable?
In our heads.
Okay, we got a lot of people who have to come back to class to get this figured out. Tariffs were an expensive problem. The McKinley tariffs put a tax on more than 1,500 products. Tariffs did fund the American government for much of the 19th century because there was no income tax. The tariffs were designed to protect American workers from cheap foreign imports. The U.S. Supreme Court case, Nix versus Hannon, definitively ruled that for the purposes of the 1883 Tariff Act, a tomato is legally classified as a vegetable. It is a vegetable according to the Supreme Court because of tariff purpose. You're like, huh? Huh? No, you're shaking your head. But the Supreme Court justices said that a tomato, or tomato, depending on where you're from, is a vegetable. While it is a fruit because it develops from the flower of a plant, contains seeds, the court's decision emphasized the common understanding and culinary use of tomatoes as a vegetable. So you're right, it is a fruit. But the Supreme Court said, no, it's not. No, it's not, for purposes of tariffs. Okay, this is the country of Hawaii. Hawaii was a kingdom. It had been a kingdom for most of the 19th century, and at that spot Mark Twain stood and once remarked that that was the prettiest place on the island of Oahu. Anybody been to Honolulu? So he claimed that that was the prettiest spot. I'll disagree with it, but it's Mark Twain. The U.S. started becoming involved in the economic affairs of Hawaii in the 1830s when the United States started importing sugarcane. The American sugarcane growers pushed the Hawaiian government to sign a reciprocity, wow, that's a word that I keep hearing lately too, treaty with the U.S. in 1875 to lower the tariffs on sugarcane being imported to the states. Ohio Congressman William McKinley's tariff of 1890 lowered all tariffs on sugar imported to the United States except for one country, the Kingdom of Hawaii. And this is causing a problem because the sugarcane growers demanded that the Hawaiian government begin talks with the United States to lower tariffs on Hawaiian sugarcane. Does this sound familiar, like it's taking place right now? This stuff with tariffs? The Queen announced plans for a new constitution early in 1893. But on January 14th, a group of mostly Euro-American business leaders in residence formed the Committee of Safety. And that's the sugar lobby. And they basically staged a coup d'etat against the kingdom. And they sought annexation by the United States. The United States government minister, was a guy named John L. Stevens. And he responded to a request from the Committee of Safety and summoned a company of Marines. Now, Benjamin Harrison is still president of the United States at that point. He doesn't give up until March 4th. He says, sure, I'm sending the Marines. Harrison also pushed for the annexation of Hawaii in the final 2 months of his term, but he couldn't get it accomplished. This was Samuel Dole. Sanford Dole, rather. He is now the member of the Smith Brothers Cough Drops Brotherhood, and he takes over the country. He was a descendant of the American missionary community to Hawaii, and he advocated the westernization and destruction of not only the Hawaiian government, but he also wanted to get rid of the Hawaiian culture. Get rid of it. By the way, who went to Hawaii here? How many people? Did you get laid when you got to Hawaii? Get laid. You know, did any girl greet you there and put a bunch of flowers around? Yeah, you got laid. Yeah, you did get laid. See, she got laid when she went to Hawaii. So did I. And generally, in the old days, not today so much, when you do get to Hawaii, you get laid, like in the flowers. Anyway, after the overthrow of the monarchy, he served as the president of Hawaii, and he pushed for Hawaii's annexation. Annexation, that's something else we've heard this year, haven't we? Annex Canada? Well, the annexation of Hawaii by the United States. Okay, how many of you want to be one of the first ones ever to go on the Ferris wheel? Anybody? Anybody want to try out the Ferris wheel? Because if you were in Chicago in 1893, you got to test that out. The first ever Ferris wheel. And you got a whole bunch of other things that you use today. Common products. I feel like I'm like Groucho Marx, say the secret word, get $100. They're common words and common products that you use and probably use even today. I mean, like this morning. Anyway, the Ferris wheel. America hosted the Chicago World's Fair, or World's Columbian Exposition of 1893, as a celebration of Christopher Columbus's voyage to the continent 401 years earlier. They didn't do it in 1892, they did in 1893. Chicago beat out New York, St. Louis, and Washington, D.C. for the privilege of hosting the fair. It opened on May 5th. The fair provided a showcase for American power and a reflection of the nation's prevailing values. It would thrive, despite the fact we're going through the panic of 1893. The Ferris wheel, that was invented by G.W.G. Ferris, who was a Pittsburgh engineer, and it was a dazzling new wonder that was there, called electricity. Now, you take electricity for granted, right? I just flipped that switch, and I needed electricity for flipping that switch. But in 1893, people are dazzled with a display of electricity at the Chicago World's Fair. Now, there was a town, Great Barrington in Massachusetts, General Electric was there, that actually had streetlights by this point. However, most people never saw electricity until then. The exposition was opened by a dramatic act when Grover Cleveland pushed the button on the ceremonial platform in front of the administration building and set the great Ellis engine in motion, turning on the electric power for the exposition. And that's what they saw at night. Now think of this, you don't see any electricity, you don't really see lights at night. What do you think in 1893? You're probably going, hey, that's great. That's great, look at that. It's all lit up. The Midway was the most outstanding feature at the fair. And it would be George Washington Gale's Ferris gigantic wheel ride that was the feature. The first Ferris wheel ever built. This was a direct response to Gustave Eiffel's tower for the Paris Fair of 1889. Of course, the Eiffel Tower is still there. The attraction featured a 140-foot towers and 250 diameter wheel whose apex brought riders to a point higher than the crown of the Statue of Liberty, which had opened about 9 years earlier. For 50 cents, 18 bucks today, a rider went 2 revolutions, which took 20 minutes. That was kind of, that was probably a good value at that time. The Midway performers included the escape artist Harry Houdini, along with the ragtime pianist Scott Joplin, and Buffalo Bill Cody and his Wild West show. Is that good entertainment? What do you think? There were also beauty contests, dwarf elephants, a 2-headed pig, boxing matches, and Hindu jugglers. For the first time, Americans were offered hamburgers. How many of you eat hamburgers today?
Everybody.
No, I don't. I haven't eaten meat in 30 years. Hamburger sandwiches.
A vegan?
What? No, it's just, I just don't eat meat. It's not, it was a conscious thing. I'm not vegan or anything of that nature. Anyway, they were offered hamburger sandwiches. You could buy a hamburger sandwich for the first time in your life. You could also get fizzy carbonated soft drinks. Coca-Cola actually started in 1892. And you could get a postcard there. For the first time, you could get a postcard and send it to your friends. And also, Cracker Jack. How many of you have had Cracker Jack or sung Take Me Out to the Ball Game? Everyone likes Cracker Jack, America's famous food confection. The more you eat, the more you want. And that guy dressed up in the Navy suit is still around all these years later. No one had ever added peanuts to a popcorn, and when the salesman at the fair first tried the snack, he yelled out, "Cracker Jack!" which meant it was wonderful. 2 brothers, Frederick William Ruckheim and Louis Ruckheim, began selling popcorn after the Great Chicago Fire, and while they would create several candies and snacks, Cracker Jack was their most famous. How many of you know dentists and oral surgeons and periodontists who are very happy that William Wrigley introduced juicy fruit gum at the World's Fair? How many of you like juicy fruit gum?
Wrigley.
Wrigley's juicy fruit gum. The juicy fruit lasted like 8 seconds. But he also sold spearmint there. But there is the man, juicy fruit, made famous. So you can buy juicy fruit there. 2 years before his gum debuted at the World's Fair, William Wrigley Jr. arrived in Chicago with only about $32 in his pocket, which would be $1,100 today. He certainly didn't invent the gum, but juicy fruit stuck after its introduction at the World's Fair. Wrigley's Spearmint. How many of you like spearmint gum? Yeah.
The cups.
Yeah, that was also released that year. How about the zipper? How about the zipper? How many of you used the zipper just before you came here? I did. The zipper makes its debut in 1893. The zipper. While there were several versions of the zipper being invented around the same time, it was the Whitcomb-Judson zipper. It was displayed at the World's Fair through his company, Universal Fastener. The idea of an automatic continuous clothing closure was first introduced in prototype form in the early 1850s, and Judson built off that original idea, creating a clasp locker. Despite being displayed as a novelty at the World's Columbian Exposition, fairgoers saw it as a game changer for their clothing, particularly men. You know what it's like to use buttons? And, you know, that takes a little while. Zipper, up and down, not a problem. Not a problem at all. Oh, Aunt Jemima makes her debut at the Chicago World's Fair. They had a dream. Promoters picked Cook to be Aunt Jemima. Her real name was Nancy Green. But the world knew her as Aunt Jemima, and Aunt Jemima was there. But it wasn't played by her, it was played by another, Nancy Davis, Nancy Green, played Aunt Jemima. The first ready mixed pancake flour, known as Aunt Jemima, was also introduced at the World's Columbian Exposition. While the flour mill was originally purchased in 1888 in St. Joseph's, Missouri, it did not gain popularity until the World's Fair. Nancy Green, a former slave who was working as a domestic in Chicago, was picked to be Aunt Jemima. Davis made pancakes on the grounds of the fair, which was sold to visitors all over the world. So there was a real Aunt Jemima. Oh, how many of you have had cream of wheat? Never. You don't like it? I used to like the lumps in the cream of wheat when they're all lumped up.
Very lumpy.
Yeah, very lump. I love the lumps. I love the lumps. Anyway, a dainty breakfast. The morning meal is apt to set the pace for the day. If dainty, simple, and sufficiently nutritious, one leaves the breakfast table with a feeling of well-being that fortifies for the day's duties. Cream of wheat. You can get cream of wheat. Think of all the stuff that you can get there. Now, cream of wheat, known to many as a breakfast porridge, also debuted. While its taste wasn't the most popular product amongst the culinary critics, like you, of the fair, it gained popularity because of how quickly it could be prepared, as well as its heartiness. Presented by the Grand Forks Diamond Milling Company out of North Dakota, their straightforward appeal approach was to grind down the meat and make it into a farina cereal. Pabst Blue Ribbon Beer makes its debut. Look at all these products that were there.
Stuff.
Yeah, a lot of stuff. That's actually my basement. I have the former owners left me a Schaefer beer sign, a Rheingold light-up sign, a Pabst Brewery sign, and that's hangs in my basement. And sometimes I'll put up some saying on there. Frederick Pabst, who had married the daughter of Philip Best, brewery owner, and become not only family but business partners, going on to create a beer. Originally, the beer was known as Pabst Best Select, and it was a highly successful beer in 1872 in Milwaukee. When the Columbian Exposition rolled around, Chicago's 90 miles south of Milwaukee, there was a chance for national attention. For every beer sold at the fair, a silk blue ribbon was tied around each can as a way to stand out. When asking for a beer, patrons asked for a Blue Ribbon beer, and the name stuck, a Pabst Blue Ribbon. How about an automatic dishwasher? How about say you were living in 1893 and the dishes are piling up. Would you want an automatic dishwasher? Probably, right? The original design for the dishwasher just splashed water onto the dishes, and it wasn't very effective or efficient. Josephine Cochran decided to fix the problems. 1886, she invented her first machine, although she received no inventor's credit or investors because, why? She was a woman. A woman shouldn't be doing this, should she?
Didn't change much.
What? Well, at the World's Columbian Exposition, Cochran got her chance to display her dishwasher in front of an audience, displaying to a curious crowd her invention, which was capable of washing and drying 240 dishes in 2 minutes. That's pretty good. But the World's Fair, you got to remember, this is also the 1890s. And here you got an Eskimo, and here's an African who's doing spear. He's got his spear, and all the stuff that's going on, all the stereotypes of the day that's going on. Many civil rights activists gave talks at the Chicago World's Fair on women's rights, African American rights, and Native American rights at the forefront. However, that could not be said about the exhibits. African Americans were shut out, but this was normal in Jim Crow America. Oh, you could get a job, And they did get a job, African Americans, at the fair, but it wasn't much of a job other than it was a minimum wage job and maybe you show people around. For African American leaders, the fair seemed to be the perfect opportunity to exhibit the contributions, achievements, and racial progress of African Americans in the nearly 30 years since the end of slavery. Exposition organizers refused to give African Americans a voice in the development of the fair. Blacks were allowed to participate as low-level workers, performers, speakers, and of course as paying guests, but white organizers kept them from any meaningful positions of influence or authority. Social reformers such as Ida B. Wells, Frederick Douglass, Irvin Garland Penn, and Ferdinand Lee Barnett wrote a protest pamphlet intended for distribution at the fair in multiple languages. It was called "The Reason Why Colored Americans is Not in the World's Columbian Exposition." The pamphlet was written to make international visitors aware of both the achievements of blacks since the anticipation and the difficult and dangerous conditions they continued to face after slavery. The Haitian government allowed the protesters to use their building, which assured that the pamphlet was distributed to park guests. Unfortunately, it was only printed in English because they didn't have money to print it in other languages. To appease black protesters, fair organizers designated August 25th as Colored American Day in celebration of African American achievement. Speech given by Frederick Douglass, which attracted 2,500 fair goers. After being heckled by an audience member about the Negro problem, Douglass put aside his prepared remarks and refuted the challenger's remarks in a speech. And there is Frederick Douglass. And this is what he said: "There is, in fact, no such problem. The real problem has been given a false name. It's called Negro for a purpose. It has substituted Negro for nation, because no one is despised and hated, and the other is loved and honored. The true problem is a national problem. Further, the problem is whether the American people have honesty enough, loyalty enough, honor enough, patriotism enough to live up to their own Constitution. Look at the progress the Negroes made in 30 years. Measure the Negro, but not by the standard of the splendid civilization of Caucasianism or Caucasian. Bend down and measure him from the depths out of which he has risen." They're bloomers. She said they're knickerbockers or knickers. They are bloomers. And this becomes a central part of the Chicago World's Fair. The bicycle, the great dress reformer of the 19th century. Why? Yes?
The name Bloomer was the name of the lady that invented
The bloomers. Yes, the bloomers. But this is the history lesson from 1893. There was a discussion of women's clothes. The Women's Congress of the World's Columbian Exposition revived the interest in the bloomer as an aid in improving women's health through physical exercise. Their session on women's dress opened with Lucy Stone, reminiscing about the bloomer movement of the 1850s. She extolled the bloomer as the cleanest, neatest, most comfortable, and most sensible garment she had ever worn, and young women modeling different versions of the dress. Bloomers, skirtless, baggy knee-length trousers fastened to the leg a little below the knees, became the part of the new women's movement because it could be worn by women for bicycle riding. Riding a bicycle gave women more freedom. What do you think? If you got on a bicycle, would you have more freedom? You would. You would. You'd be able to get to point A to point B without depending on somebody else. And that was the whole point. The whole point. The bicycle bloomer. And if you look at this bicycle, it's got the bar going down there, and it's got a dress that you could wear riding a bicycle. Bloomers were adopted by women as a more practical alternative to restricted Victorian dresses for cycling, and they became a symbol of women's liberation and a challenge to traditional gender norms. The bicycle, with its association with freedom and independence, further fueled the movement for women's rights. Women felt liberated. They could get on a bicycle, and even though it might be a short distance or a far distance, they had some freedom. The bicycle bloomer, and if you want to get a bicycle, complete with pneumatic tires and double loop frame and spring saddle and etc., hey, go get a catalog from the Winton Bicycle Company, 118 Perkins Avenue, Cleveland, Ohio. By the late 1870s, the first so-called safety bicycle appears. Safety bicycles had wheels of equal size and a chain drive that transformed the power from the pedals to the rear wheel. The safety quickly proved the superior design, both faster and more stable than the ordinary, and remains the basis for bicycle designs of today. The safety, not the ordinary, which was ironically a bicycle ordinary people, including women, could ride, was the key here. The ordinary quickly became obsolete, and the safety bicycle helped usher in the cycling craze of the 1890s. The placement of the gears and the pedals at the time made it difficult for women to ride in a long dress or skirt. Bloomers changed the game. Women could go places without men. They could bicycle to work. They could get exercise. They could pick up items at stores. It was freedom. And women were becoming nurses, and they were becoming teachers, and they were becoming secretaries in the 1890s. And some women, hushed the thought, even went to college. And they could get there with their bicycle. Now, there was criticism. There was a lot of criticism. This is how many of you are from Brooklyn? You're from Brooklyn. Only one from Brooklyn. Okay. There was a newspaper once called the Brooklyn Citizen, and they were in favor of the modified bloomers for women, according to an October 25th story. But the trouble is that there are some women who go to extremes. Our representative saw a sight last Sunday on the boulevard that would disgust the most enthusiastic advocate of the bloomers. On the porch sat a woman with tight pants, not bloomers. Or maybe it belonged to her brother. Low-cut shoes and tight stockings. They were disgusted. A woman in pants. They were absolutely disgusted. Meanwhile, in the November 18th edition of the Nottingham Guardian in England, the paper claimed that several women had written to the Daily Telegram to express their disgust over shocking and painful spectacle of women riding about in cycling costumes. I contend that this procedure is demoralizing and calculated still further to lower the standard of men's respect for women, now alas so marked a feature of the age we live in. If it be illegal for a man to wear women's attire in public, it is also, or it is not equally so, for a woman to assume that of a man. Women wanted a role in society. They didn't want to be the quiet wife, subservient to their husband. They wanted to own land. They wanted to make money in jobs. The world is changing. And it changes in New Zealand because of this woman. Her name is Kate Shepherd, and she is the leader in getting women the right to vote in New Zealand, the first country that allowed women the right to vote. It is September 19th. New Zealand became the first self-governing country in the world to grant women the right to vote in national elections. Years of suffragette meetings in towns and cities across the country, with women often traveling considerable distances to hear lectures and speeches, pass resolutions, and sign petitions. Kate Shepherd was instrumental in the movement. New Zealand women first went to the polls in national elections in November. In the United States, Colorado granted women the right to vote through a state referendum on November 7th. By the way, There weren't any women who were voting in Colorado on November 7th. It was the men who said, sure, let's have the women vote. This is Dr. Daniel Hale Williams. He's African American, and he literally invents the procedure of open heart surgery. On July 9th, Daniel Hale Williams, an African American surgeon, gained recognition when he successfully performed one of the first documented heart surgeries to repair a wound, which marked a milestone in the evolution of open heart surgery. The patient was James Cornish. He had been stabbed in the chest. He was treated by Williams, who opened his chest, repaired the wounded heart muscle. Cornish recovered completely within 51 days. Dr. Williams founded Providence Hospital in Chicago, the first interracial hospital in the United States. That was a couple years earlier. Dr. Williams was considered a pioneer heart surgeon during a time when technological discoveries were revolutionary or revolutionizing the practice of medicine. Oklahoma land rush, got all this Cherokee land, got all these white settlers. Let's get rid of the Cherokee land and give it to the white settlers. September 16th, the largest land run in American history begins with more than 100,000 people pouring into the Cherokee Strip of Oklahoma to claim valuable land that had once belonged to Native Americans. With a single shot from a pistol, the mad dash began, and land-hungry pioneers on horseback and in carriages raced forward to stake their claims to the best acres. Ironically, not many years before that, the same land had been considered worthless desert. The land rush was one of the four sponsored by the government, this time across the Cherokee grazing lands of the northwestern corner of the territory. The tribe leased the land to cattle drovers, a lucrative deal, but Congress overrode their possession with new bills. This all goes back to Andrew Jackson and the Indian Removal Act. It was May of 1830 when Jackson, the president, signed the Indian Removal Act. Remember, Jackson got rid of all of the Indians in Tennessee. Cherokee left Georgia, North and South Carolina, Alabama, Tennessee, and Texas starting in 1836 and continued through 1838 to 1839 rather, to resettle the territory. Congress was stealing Native American lands for westward expansion. The 5 civilized tribes were among the first to be sent en masse to new lands, promised reserves in perpetuity. It didn't last that long. Gandhi is arrested in South Africa on May 24th. He was in South Africa to attend a legal matter. Within weeks of Gandhi's arrival in Durban, he was asked to travel to Pretoria to settle a dispute. On June 7th, he was thrown off the first-class compartment of a Pretoria-bound train in Pietermaritzburg. The young lawyer spent the night in the waiting hall on the deserted railway station. The humiliation that he went through convinced him to take a greater call to fight for rights of Indians in South Africa. It was the beginning of his career as an activist. Well, they're going to put me in the movies, and Thomas Edison is about ready to start a movie studio. His workers built the first film production studio, the Black Maria, on the grounds of Edison's laboratories in West Orange, New Jersey, to make movies with the kinetoscope. The technology required bright light, so the studio was built on a rotating platform with a window in the ceiling to capture as much sunlight as possible throughout the day. Small and covered in black tar paper, the studio got its name from the cramped police vans or paddy wagons, which were commonly called Black Marias at the time. That's a diesel engine. I had a diesel car once. It was terrible. It was absolutely terrible. But the diesel engine begins in 1893. On August 10th, Rudolph Diesel's prime model internal combustion engine, single 10-foot iron cylinder with a flywheel at its base, runs on its own power for the first time in Augsburg, Germany. On September 22nd, the Duryea brothers, Charles and Frank, tested their first gasoline-powered automobile, the Duryea motor wagon, on the streets of Springfield, Massachusetts. On December 24th, Henry Ford completed his first successful gas engine, often referred to as the kitchen sink engine. The engine was a small, one-cylinder gasoline model built from scrap or available parts. There's the Stanley Cup. It is the oldest sports cup given out to a championship team in North America. Well, actually the Grey Cup, but that's the Canadian Football League, which is a minor league football in Canada, but this is Major League, and that's the Stanley Cup. And me and my wife, my daughter, who was 3 months old at the time, got to play with the Stanley Cup for 15 minutes. And if that cup could talk, it would have stories. The Stanley Cup was the creation of Sir Frederick Arthur Stanley, Lord of Preston, and 16th Earl of Derby. He was of notable birth, son of three-time Prime Minister of England. Stanley became an ice hockey fan after watching an 1889 game at the Montreal Winter Carnival. 1892, Lord Stanley decided to donate a trophy to be awarded to the top hockey team in the country, the Gold Line. Silver Ball was ready for the 1892-93 season, and he paid for it. Cost him $48.67 Canadian at the time, and there was Lord Stanley. By the way, anybody been up to Vancouver? Nobody's ever been to Vancouver? You've been to Vancouver? Have you gone to Stanley Park in Vancouver? You must have. Everybody goes to Stanley Park there. That was named after Lord Stanley. Lord Stanley donated a lavish trophy to the Canadian Amateur Hockey Association. Trophy was originally called the Dominion Hockey Challenge Cup, and it was presented in 1893 to the Montreal Amateur Athletic Association team, and they were the champions of the Amateur Hockey Association. Lord Stanley himself never witnessed a championship hockey contest or his namesake trophy presented to a championship team. Stanley's term as Governor General was scheduled to end in September. However, in April, Stanley's brother, the 15th Earl of Derby, died. Lord Stanley resigned the Governor Generalship and returned home to England on July 15th to become the 16th Earl of Derby. Stanley Cup Park in Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada was named after Lord Stanley in 1888, and that is one of the great parks of North America. Baseball has new rules. Well, they keep changing the rules of baseball, particularly if you're a pitcher. Pitcher used to throw underhanded. Batters used to ask for the ball, can you throw me a ball right around there? And they were 50 feet away. Over the years, the rules basically change, and you get to where you are today. 60 feet, 6 inches, the pitcher must be away. It was 50 feet, and all of a sudden, 60 feet, 6 inches, baseball owners wanted more offense and thought moving back pitchers would help hitters. Changes were made to baseball bats as described in New Rule 13, stating the bat must be made round and of hardwood and may have twine on the handle, which is tape, or granulated substance applied not to exceed 18 inches from the end. No bat should exceed 42 inches in length. There was just one major league at the time, the National League, which had 12 teams. Well, the legacy. How many of you know much about Benjamin Harrison? Probably not very many of you. But anyway, here we go. 1890, the Republicans controlled both houses of Congress, but an economic depression in the agricultural West and South led to pressure for legislation that conservative Republicans normally resisted. The 1890 McKinley Tariff Act, named after the Ohio Congressman William McKinley, substantially raised duties on most imports. Harrison supported McKinley's proposal. House Republicans, including McKinley, swept out of office in the 1890 elections because of tariffs. The Harrison administration tried to expand American influence abroad. Harrison seemed to be unaware of the massive industrial changes that had overtaken of America, of the poverty that Jacob Riis wrote about in his classic study, How the Other Half Lives, published in 1890, or the depths of economic hardship affecting nation's farmers as they fell down the economic ladder to tendency. And the industrial crisis that began to topple the railroads, banks, and business corporations like dominoes within days of his retirement. He was a conservationist, endorsed 2 bills to protect civil rights for African Americans. He also appointed Frederick Douglass to serve as U.S. Minister to Haiti and relied on his counsel frequently. He expanded the Navy. Smash the corporations, bust the trust, take the money out of the hands of the Gilded Age millionaires. That's what's going on. Industrialists, consolidated power, and labor unrest began to surge. Between 1880 and 1900, American workers staged nearly 37,000 strikes, including some of the largest and most famous in history. The Panic of 1893 would resolve itself by 1897. Thousands of local strikes protested starving wages, long hours, and unsafe conditions. The Progressive Era, starting in the late 1890s and continuing into the early 20th century, is considered the period that replaced directly the Gilded Age, marked by a focus on social reform and government intervention to address the problems of the Gilded Age. Hey, you know what the vegetable, the official state vegetable of New Jersey is? It's the tomato. The tomato in 2005 became New Jersey's official state vegetable. Tariffs have been a key part of the American economy since the country's founding years. The tariff of 1789, which was designed to raise revenue for the new federal government, to the Smoot-Hawley tariff, active in 1930, which many economists led to the Great Depression being made worse. Tariffs have been the subject of major debates over the centuries. Most tariffs have been either eliminated or carry a marginal charge. In 2025, President Donald Trump decided that tariffs were the way to go for the economy. That is Hawaii. On July 4th, 1894, the provisional government of Hawaii was replaced by the Republic of Hawaii. 1898, the United States annexed Hawaii. 1900, the territory of Hawaii was granted self-governance. Plantation owners and capitalists who maintained control through financial institutions found territorial status convenient because they were able to import cheap labor and foreign labor. Tourism became Hawaii's biggest industry, and the United States' 50th state was Hawaii, and that came in 1960. The Queen composed Aloha Oi, which is considered Hawaii's most famous song. She wrote it in 1878, Farewell to Thee. She was telling an old boyfriend, I'm the princess. Yeah, that's how it goes. And it's a beloved Hawaiian composition and is recognized within and outside the islands. The Chicago World's Fair. It ended when the mayor, Carter Harrison III, was assassinated by Patrick Eugene Prendergast 2 days before the fair's closing on October 31st. Closing ceremonies were canceled in favor of a public memorial. Almost all of the fair structures were designed to be temporary, and of the 200 buildings that were erected, only 2 stand, the Palace of Fine Arts and the World's Congressional Auxiliary Building. After the run was done, the Ferris wheel was moved to the Chicago North Side to an exclusive neighborhood. An unsuccessful circuit court action was filed against the owners of the wheel to have it moved, but the wheel stayed there until it was moved to the St. Louis World's Fair in 1904. Chicago World's Fair got 27 million visitors, generated about $35 million, about $1.2 billion today. It closed in the black, $446,000, $16 million today. It was the first international exposition in the United States to achieve a profit. That is Ida Wells. Life for African Americans did not get better for decades. Jim Crow laws in the American South were not knocked down until 1964 with the Civil Rights Act. There were decades of black neighborhoods being sacked, lynching, separate but equal facilities, which began with the Supreme Court ruling in 1896. African Americans could not play Major League Baseball until Jackie Robinson broke the color barrier in 1947. African Americans were kicked out of the National Football League after the 1933 season. They would return in 1946. The bicycle and the bloomers. Bicycles extended women's mobility outside the home. A woman didn't need a horse to come and go as she pleased, whether to work outside the home or participate in social causes. Those who have been confined by Victorian standards for behavior and attire could break conventions and get out of the house. The bicycle craze boosted the rational clothing movement, which encouraged women to do away with long, cumbersome skirts and bulky undergarments. Safety bicycle frames accommodated skirts, which got shorter, and the most daring women chose bloomers that resembled men's pants. A sport corset was designed with elastic for comfort during exercise. And finally, New Zealand gives women the right to vote. 1896, Kate Shepherd helped establish the Council of Women and became its first president. Among the issues she supported was greater equality in marriage and the right for women to run for the New Zealand Parliament. Kate Shepherd was later active in the women's suffrage movements in New England and the United States. Women's rights that were denied in the 1800s. American women had fewer rights than a male inmate in an asylum, insane asylum. Women could not vote, serve on juries, testify in court, hold public office, attend college, or practice law. If a woman were married, it would be illegal for her to sign a contract, own or inherit property, keep or invest her own earnings, have automatic rights to children. Women were expected to center their lives around family and home, obey husbands in all matters, not voice strong opinions in public, and behave in a refined or polite way. That would all change in the 1890s and onwards. Any questions, any comments? Your turn to talk.